Thank you so much, Jessi. Thank you for you came from LA?
I came from LA, but I want it to be known that I'm a New Yorker.
We're going to talk about that. I want to get to your credits first, though.
Sure.
Jessi Klein, co-executive producer and head writer for Inside Amy Schumer, producer and co-star of Big Mouth, showrunner and executive producer of Showtime's I Love That For You, starring the great Vanessa Bayer. I love her.
Greatest.
Guest and host of Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, and author of 2 comedy memoirs, You'll Grow Out of It and I'll Show Myself Out, essays on midlife and motherhood, and she's currently at work on her 3rd book of essays. So welcome, Jessi Klein.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Mike.
Let's talk about New York. So you were born and raised in Greenwich Village in the 70s and 80s.
Correct.
And I'd imagine you have some fond memories of that time and location?
The fondest, yes. Yeah.
You grew up as, and this is something I was surprised to read, I didn't know too many kids who were huge fans of not only Lenny Bruce, but Groucho Marx.
Yes. Groucho Marx is a spirit animal, if one can say. Yeah, all those movies, Marx Brothers movies, used to just air on whatever TV was before cable. And I would watch them with my dad and my brother, and Duck Soup and all those things. I just loved him. I always I dressed as him for Halloween when I was probably 13. Never did Sexy Cat, just Groucho, giant blazer and a mustache, which I kind of already had, if I'm being honest.
So what was it about him in particular that appealed to a kid in Manhattan in the 70s and 80s?
There's a lot of, I think, comedy people who, I know, like Judd Apatow is very, do I have to be here? Can I be here? This feels okay, right? Yeah, Judd loves Groucho. I think, I really just responded to the idea that he always was a little outside of what was going on and sort of making little side remarks, making fun of what was going on. I was a very, very shy kid who was not great at making friends. I always felt a little outside of things, and sort of felt like, I think I'm thinking things the way that Groucho is saying them. I guess it was just that outsider idea that, like, you could be funny sort of over on the edge, which I think was sort of how I ended up figuring it out a little bit.
So Groucho was asked a question, and his answer, you said, really appealed to you as a kid, and the question was, have you ever known sadness? Groucho was asked that. And the answer was, if I didn't know what sad was, why would I spend my whole life trying to make people laugh? And you said that your head exploded when you heard that.
Yes, this is prosthetics. My head was fully exploded. I think I mean, there's a lot of cliches about sad clowns, and I'm sure you're dear friends with and know many of them. But I think everyone can relate to that idea in some way. I was like a middle child. My parents... my dad was a probation officer. My mom was a teacher. My dad also was a security guard at the Morgan Library in New York. They were working really hard. It was like sort of tough, and I found like my role in the family slowly became like, I'm gonna try to like lighten the mood in here a little bit. I think that stuff sticks with you for sure. You that kind of muscle memory of how can I take us out of, the muck a little bit.
You said something that I have heard from a lot of comedy writing friends, is that you spent your Saturday nights in high school just home watching SNL alone.
A perfect night.
Right.
Still to this day. Oh, yum. Now there's a little more alcohol involved, but yeah. I mean, there wasn't any, and now there is some.
So your first job out of school was what? You were a temp at Comedy Central?
My very first job out of school, yes, I made it to, that was, just to say, my very first job out of college I was the office manager of Bette Midler's Clean Up the City nonprofit called New York Restoration Project, which was like an organization doing God's work, but quickly, like, I think my first or second week, they were like, so we're building a boat and we need you to get insurance on the boat. And I like went to the bathroom and started weeping. I was like, I don't even know what insurance. I don't know how to get insurance on a boat. Anyway, ended up at Comedy Central. I was a temp there. It was sort of like when a dog holds its own leash. Like I was the temp. I was temping for someone who called temps. So then I was calling the temps, and then someone in the development department called one day and was like, we fired our assistant. We need an assistant in the development department. I was like, I'll pay the rent, kind of thing. So, yeah, I weaseled in.
So that's actually a great way to get into the business. I mean, whether it's as an intern, as a temp,
Sure.
whatever it happens to be. And you're one of the few people I know, the comedy writers and performers, who started off as an executive. You worked there for how many years?
I was there for 7 years. Yeah, it took half of those I was in therapy figuring out how to get out. But I was great. It was like going to graduate school for comedy, but reverse flow of pay.
Right, because typically there's a disconnect between the executive side and the creative side, but you came up through the executive side.
Yeah, I mean, I started as an assistant. I didn't grow up. I was saying this to a group of students here the other night. I didn't, it was such a different time. And now, like, it seems like people know paths to working in comedy, and I didn't know anyone in entertainment. There was no internet, sorry. So I became an assistant to someone in development and someone in talent, and just started reading scripts. And for the talent person, I was going out to see stand-up every night. I'm sure I met you at some point in that way. That's how I kind of got in there, and I didn't know anything about how TV was made or done, and I learned so much.
It's a real sense of, I went to Tulane, and it was a real sense of mystery about how does one go from point A in New Orleans to comedy, whether in LA or New York. And this was pre-internet. It is easier now, but there's still that sense of mystery. And one of the things I want to talk about is it can be done. You just have to know what to do, and you have to know what not to do.
Yes. Yeah. It sounds like you have some real specific ideas
No, I
about
was
what
gonna ask
not
you
to
if you
do.
had any.
The not felt ominous.
Oh, I've so many knots. So many knots.
Don't do it.
Did you oversee the development of the Chappelle Show?
I participated in it. My boss was a man named Lou Wallach, who was the head of the development department in New York, and I was at the time either the manager or the director. But Dave was given a deal because obviously Dave was already Dave, but he had a couple of, I think, like something that didn't work out at Fox, and we didn't really pay people what they mostly deserved. But in return, there was a tremendous amount of creative freedom. So yes, Dave, the Chappelle Show started while I was there, and I was one of the executives on that show that got to watch that absolutely bonkers rise of this incredible show and this voice.
Yeah, I mean, it became huge. The catchphrases would be on T-shirts, on boardwalks. I mean, it exploded.
Yeah.
Now, were you there when the show went off the air after 3 seasons?
Yes, I was.
So what happened?
I mean, I think there have been many interviews about what happened, but it certainly was one of the wilder days. And, in entertainment, when you work in TV, I mean, I've been working in TV for like 20 years at this point, and there are so many crazy things that ultimately can happen. But for sure, the day that Dave didn't show up to set was quite something. You can Google what he's got to say about it. Yeah, it was really crazy.
So it was a surprise to even executives that this was happening.
Yeah. Yes.
And were you involved with TV Funhouse and Strangers with Candy?
Yes. Strangers with Candy. This was why this was truly the most kismety stroke of luck to end up getting this job, really out of nowhere. I was saying this to these students the other night. The way I ended up as a temp, just to give you a sense, there was one when I graduated from college. Well, my first job was I picked up working at the video store that I had worked at during college, where I was in Chelsea, and I was renting a lot of porn to people, but everyone was great, but I was like, is this my life? And then my boyfriend at the time told me there was this temp agency called Force One. That was owned by this guy named Jeff. Shout out to Jeff. It was the only temp agency in New York where you didn't have to take a typing test.
Mm-hmm.
To this day, professional writer can't. I type like a dinosaur, like a T-Rex. So I knew I would fail the typing test. So I went to him, and I just was like, I didn't take a typing test, and he just would interview you, and I was like, I wanna work at Comedy Central, and ended up getting this job where I just, it was really like getting an education in how everything worked. And Strangers with Candy was a show that was in development when I started. And if you haven't watched that show, it's a young guy named Stephen Colbert, didn't go anywhere, Amy Sedaris and Paul Dinello, and then I got the opportunity to be in a room with them when they were working on this show. It's such an insane show. But, and then Robert Smigel, TV Funhouse. I was like this kid getting to sort of see all of these legends come through the door. It really made no fucking sense.
But it's such a great way to get in. When I started, I worked as a temp at the Washington Post.
All right.
But
Shouldn't have mentioned my porn video job.
this is after 7 years of retail.
Okay. Where was the retail?
Kent Mill Records in Virginia and Maryland.
Okay, give it up.
And by being
No one's giving it up.
But by being in that world, I got to go into the job announcements, and that was the only reason I got hired at the
Wait,
Washington.
got to go into where?
The job announcements office.
Yes.
Right, so if you're in that world, that's very good advice for young students. Get into that world, even if it's as an internship, even if it's for $10 an hour. You want to be where the people are that you want to end up.
Yeah. Just try to snooch in there a little bit. Write that down.
Snooch?
Just snooch in there a little bit.
Let's talk about your
Like, that's not good advice. Go on.
transformation into stand-up. You got into stand-up at what age?
A little older than you're supposed to get into it. I started working Comedy Central when I was about 22 or 23, and then I didn't start doing stand-up until I was 26. I was, again, very shy in general, but I loved stand-up, grew up. Part of why I wanted to work at Comedy Central was like, back in the day, all Comedy Central used to air was stand-up specials and stand-up shows, and I just always wanted to do that. And and I think going out to see so much stand-up, like every night in New York, and it was an amazing time to be going to see, there are all kinds of luminaries doing it. And when I would see people who were amazing and live in these little rooms, I'd be like, I want to do that. And then sometimes you'd see people that sucked, and I'd be like, well, I think I could at least be that bad. And finally, it took me a while, and I got up and did like an open mic where you paid to perform, which felt super cool. But I just started doing it that way. So I was about 26.
So do you remember your first time? Everyone remembers as a comedian, their first time up on stage, and usually they kill, and it's the second time that they bomb. Mm-hmm. Did that happen with you?
Absolutely. I wouldn't say that I killed, but I did well enough that that I was like, oh, well, that feels pretty great. Am I amazing? And just enough confidence to go on to the next spot at like the Duplex. Is that a place? And then got a real wake up that I wasn't an immediate star, but like just the taste of the one good time out was like, oh, that's sort of a nice high to go after.
You said your father had raised me to avoid. My father had raised me to avoid risk at all costs. So it is a risk to get up on stage.
You're like, and he's here, and he's furious, Daddy.
Was there, I know from my family too, if you left a job that had insurance, and it didn't even matter how much you were being paid, they were furious if you didn't have another solid job. Were your parents like, what's going on here?
Not furious, but, for sure they were, blue collar, again, mom teacher, dad probation officer, both working for the city, and there was it just wasn't, they were second generation Americans.
Right.
Like my great grandparents were not from here, and there was when I got the job at Comedy Central, they were very excited because insurance, a real job, and then when I wanted to leave into the abyss, they were like, "What are you doing?" And I still carry like I was joking with you, like the scarcity mindset when you don't come from like, wild amounts of safety net. Like, who am I to take a risk when my parents have worked like multiple jobs to set a path? And I never get tired of hearing people talk about this because I think it's really a heavy thing, I think, for people who want to be creative, for a lot of people who want to be creative to take that leap. And I think it's deep stuff.
It's a huge leap. And I mean, we came from the generation still connected to the Holocaust and to the Great Depression. Our grandparents were involved with that. So to leave anything really must have meant that you felt this is what I have to do. This is not even a choice. This is what I have to do.
Yeah. I mean, it was like I was going to therapy for many years. I mean, obviously there was a lot of other problems. But no, I talked to my therapist a lot about could not break that barrier of how do I leave a job with insurance to do what is like, how arrogant am I or whatever, why do I deserve to do this? And I think it does take, I don't know if the word is, I don't want to say that I'm brave, but when I meet other people like that, having that momentum to make yourself do that, I think is something to marvel at in yourself. Like when you do it, it's something to be proud of, even if your greatest, creative dreams don't come true. Just to have made that step is
That's
big.
right. I mean, most people don't make that leap and may have regrets about it.
Yeah, for sure.
So you told a story for Moth Storytelling about, you said you lost your ability to laugh at yourself after you broke up with a long-term boyfriend. But at that point, you had to take a step back, and by doing so, you became a happier person and a better comic. And I wanted to ask you, why was that? What was it about that situation that made you a better comic?
It's funny, like, my grandmother, who was a really amazing person, give it up for Evelyn Klein. She was so funny. And I'm not like I wish I was a tattoo person. I'm not really a tattoo person, maybe one day. But like, she just always told me, like, never lose your sense of humor. And she was someone who had an incredibly hard life. That could be like a 3-hour, her life was a hard life. But she never stopped laughing at things. She was always, can I tell a quick Evelyn story?
Please. Yeah.
I'm watching the clock too, but just because it's like, this is the person on my deathbed that I would like to be. So my grandmother lived to be 97, 98 years old. The only reason she died was she wasn't sick. She fell, she broke her shoulder, you end up in the hospital, you start to go down, whatever. But so I went to visit her. She'd been in the hospital for a couple of weeks. And I'm like, should I tell the story? Anyway, and she, she's very buoyant and funny always. And it had been a few weeks, and it's a bummer. And at one point, it was just me and her, and she was like, Jessi, they're sending people every day to wash me. And I was like, well, that's good. She's like, Jess, they're really washing me. And I go, what are you talking about? And then she goes, lean forward. And I was like, okay. She goes, Jess, I got the cleanest pussy in the hospital. That's the kind of person we should all aspire to be. What, my boyfriend broke up with me?
That is a lovely story, Jessi.
Guys, it was truly one of the funniest things anyone has ever said to me. It was a good laugh.
That's the one thing they're going to remember from today.
I'm ready to accept my honorary degree from Tulane. Is that here? Do we just do it right now? Was that an answer to the question?
No, it wasn't,
okay,
but that's
cool.
fine. Joan Rivers, you say, was a big influence on you and a big influence on me. What in particular about Joan Rivers appealed to you as a comic?
Oh man, I mean, Joan is one of our greatest queens. I remember, I mean, first of all, she was just so fucking funny. Also, a really fucking hard life throughout her life, different things. Incredibly brave, doing stand up when women weren't really doing it. Um, and I remember some interview with her towards, the end, or when she was older. I don't think ever stopped performing, but she said, she's like, no one can get to me now. Like, I have nothing to lose. Like, no one can take anything from me. And I think that's like, if you are a foundation in yourself and you are like, what matters in real life, and you've seen some shit, the way Joan had seen some shit, like Hollywood it's like a shark tank of assholes and with some real bright, like, lovely people, but it's a pretty dirty process. And I've been rejected and torn apart in many ways throughout my career and humiliated. And then you just get to a point where you're like, I'm just going to do what I'm doing. And you really have to let stuff roll off of you. And I think she was like the epitome of that.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, part of what I find so inspiring about her.
So when did you reach that point?
Have I reached that point? I think I've reached that point. I'm getting closer to it. I mean, it's almost like kind of Buddhist enlightenment or something. Like, are you ever really released from it? I will say becoming a mom, becoming a parent. I mean, you have a kid, like, there's a certain amount of no fucks that you start to have once you have a kid, like, especially as a woman. I think there's like a lot of shit you just let go. I'm like, yeah, I mean, if someone fucks with my kid, I'll kill them. And like, but just all the vanity, all the things you hang on to that are smaller, you don't have room for as much anymore. Yeah, and when I'm dealing with like things about my child, the like whimsy or yeses and nos of like development executives and like they don't, not that I'm not going to pretend things don't hurt. I don't want to be rejected, but like in that Joan Rivers-y way, ideally, I've also just been doing it so long now. I'm like, yeah, sometimes it's a no, sometimes they don't want your thing. And it kind of isn't my business.
Was there a moment where on stage you felt like, I just found my voice? This is who I am. I'm comfortable doing this, and this is what I want to do.
That's a really good. These have all been good questions. I was about to say that's a really good question. That made it seem like there are other lesser questions, and they've all been really good questions. Yes, I think I started to have. I don't really perform that much anymore, but I did have those moments, like later in my performing years. And I will say, I think I felt it most also like writing the books I've written, where you're just in a format where you have X number of pages to kind of go off on any tangent you want. And I was very intimidated writing books, or especially the first one, I was like, I don't want to write a book. And then really loved it. And I hated writing it, but I loved having written it.
Well, let's talk about it. It always surprises me when TV writers, movie writers want to write a book. I've written some books, and it's a very lonely process. There's never any reaction, a live reaction to what I'm writing. It can take 2 years to write a book. So what was the So what was the impetus for you saying, I want to write for the written page rather than for the TV, movies, or the stage?
Well, I didn't want to write a book. The first book was a reaction to unemployment, and to some degree the second book. But no, the first one really was. I'm sorry, it's like I'm burping as I'm talking. Didn't need to say it. No one was noticing. And now it's a thing. I had written for the first season of Inside Amy Schumer, but it wasn't out yet. And we, nothing ever, maybe it won't go, whatever. It was done but not out, and I didn't have a job. And my manager at the time happened to connect me with a book agent he was friends with. I'd written a couple of essays in random places. Had lunch with this book agent, David Kuhn. I always have to, he's changed my life. He was like, we had a fun lunch, and he was like, I think you could write a book. And I was like, ooh, really? And he was like, yes, make a list of topics you want to write about, send it to me, then just start writing one essay a week, send it to me on Fridays, and I'll tell you when there's a critical mass of essays, and that will be a book proposal, and then I will go sell it. And I was like, whatever. But I didn't have anything else to do and no other income, so I started doing it. And it became a book proposal, and we sold it, and then I had to write it. And then it was a book. I was just like, this seems, maybe there'll be money, something. It was like an opportunity in a world where I had like no others. So, but I'm so glad that it happened.
So what did you enjoy about writing a book that you didn't find writing for TV?
Well, I definitely like writing for TV more because you are in a room full of people and
Right.
it's fun. Sometimes you get lunch for free, at least snacks. Book, you're paying for your own food the entire time. But, writing is very lonely and very hard. But there are little moments of getting, the little moments where you get in the groove and the flow of it. That does feel great. Like those little moments you hang on to. You're like, oh, I'm saying something and I'm enjoying this. Like those, it's like little wheels meeting the tree. You know how like when you drive, one of my greatest joys of living in LA is driving through a car wash because I didn't grow up like driving or going to car wash. You know what I'm talking about? When you're like, you have to maneuver your car and they're like this way, and then you get on the track and then you go into neutral.
Yeah.
And then you just
I
go
love that
through the
too.
car wash.
I pretend I'm a pilot landing on a ship, on an aircraft
That's fucked
carrier.
up. No, but like I love to have a cry while that happens. Like I'll put on music, but that moment where you're like you're locked in, hands off wheel.
You're in the flow.
I'm in flow. That was a long walk for a story that. Anyway,
Should we go back to your grandmother's pussy?
Maybe your next book.
Ooh, hello.
Title of ep.
Well, you said something interesting, and I hear this from a lot of first-time authors, something in the vein of this, like, who am I to write a book?
Oh,
And
yeah.
Your specific quote was, how is my stupid essay about anthropology going to matter? And I think that's
Anthropology, the store,
That's
to
right.
be clear, not the topic.
And I think you said that's a really toxic view to internalize. I think the details of women's lives are as important as anything in all of literature.
I agree with that.
And I love that quote because when I read the book,
We're talking about book 2.
both of the books
Both,
are
okay.
fantastic. So was there a sense of, who am I to write a book when there are so-called professional authors out there?
Yes, I do think one of the things that, and you probably realized as well, but like the longer you do it, the more you realize, like, I don't think I can't, there's so many incredible authors here. I don't know, maybe there are authors currently at Tulane right now who are like, I should be writing a book. Doris Kearns Goodwin should be writing books. But part of it too, so I love my dad. My father's like he was a probation officer, but he was also very intellectual. He's a writer, he's a poet. He got a master's in English. He's written books about Melville. Anyway, and he's like a big classics person. And so like the house was very much like, we're reading Dostoevsky. We're reading, like those are the books. Like it was very important to him that I read those books. And so book in my mind was like
Right.
Tolstoy.
Right.
And then truly I did want to write about shopping and anthropology. But you have to get rid of that. You have to get rid of that. And the stuff in terms of the second book, I'll Show Myself Out, which was really kind of about motherhood as like a hero's journey. I had some realizations writing that book because I had so much resistance to writing about female motherhood stuff. I talked about like, the word mom blog feels so like, who can, like, it's stupid, it's trivial. And then I was like, why does this feel like a topic that doesn't matter? And I've I've grown up in the culture that teaches us this stuff. So, yeah, it was like an important process to be like, oh, I'm part of that thinking too. I need to let it go.
So tell us about the third book. You're working on that now?
I'm supposed to be.
And what is that supposed to be about?
Drinking a lot in New Orleans right now.
Have you started? Oh,
Why
boy.
would you ask me that?
You never ask her about that.
Yes, I just started. It's due in a year.
And what is this about? Is there a thematic arch to it?
Why would you ask me?
Oh my gosh.
No, yes. Here's where I start to really brag. So I'm divorced, and got divorced, and another brag. It's not finalized because it's dragging out. No, I am my son's father and I broken up. He's great. Just let the record show. I didn't badmouth. Sorry. Anyway, so I'm going to write a book about sort of that, just starting over and how you like have this interruption in your life and the process at my age of like being like, oh, what is this all about? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not
I
done.
went through that as well, and it's an entirely new process.
It's an entirely
I did
new
not know
process.
that about you, that you had separated and are going through a divorce. I mean, that's a book.
Would you have still asked me to
No, I
do
would not
this?
have.
Okay.
I don't believe in that.
You're like looking for a
Morally, I
good,
find it
married,
questionable.
solid person. I understand. Well, I'm glad.
I would've-
Sorry to blow your fucking mind.
I read about you that you actually received an offer to write for Letterman, but that was my dream job growing up. But you
Oh,
received this
of course.
offer and you turned it down. And why was that?
It honestly still like feels like I still feel like really emotionally fucked up about that. Okay, so I was working at Comedy Central, had started to feel a little bit, I'd been there for several years. I was already doing stand-up, started to feel a little like golden handcuffs about that job. It's insurance.
Right.
My parents are proud of me. I bring home South Park dolls to my mother, and she loves them. She still has them in plastic.
Oh.
It's insane. Anyway, and then, yes, but I worshipped Letterman, got an opportunity to submit a packet, met with the head writers, stayed late. Do you think Letterman's calling now to be like, it's not, oh, he's retired. Anyways, I do love when someone has a ring on their phone. Oh, don't worry about it. We won't single you out. No, it's totally fine. Striped shirt. Anyway, I'm that person. Yes, so anyway, and then I fucking got the job. I was like, what? I didn't think there was a chance. So thrilled. Of course I'm getting the job. Then, the job in late night, you get a contract essentially on these 13-week cycles. So you're hired for 13 weeks. There's ultimately insurance, but really you're guaranteed 13 weeks at a time. And I told my dad this. I really don't want you guys to be mad at my dad. But my dad, because it all worked out. Look where we are. And he just said, 13 weeks? He was, oh, man. And he goes, well, that doesn't sound like much of a job at all. Yeah. And then that, penetrated into the little Death Star, and I slowly started to talk myself out of doing that job. And then I unwound doing it, and I didn't do it because I was like, what if I just get fired after 13 weeks? And then I had a nervous breakdown, and kind of was like, what? I mean, it still kills me to this day, even though I'm sort of like, well, it all ended up okay. Like I work in TV, I'm doing what I want to do. I don't think I would have wanted to stay in the world of late night writing because I go to bed very early. But it was, is it Revolutionary Road? Kate Winslet and Leo, I'm not talking about the book because I wouldn't have read it, only the movie. Right? They're going to move to Paris, and then someone says one comment, And then Leo doesn't want to move to Paris anymore.
Richard, yeah, I didn't see the movie. I read the book, but didn't
No
see
one
it.
here has seen the movie. You're like, you dumb piece of shit. Anyway, I just think the way that it's like that one comment sort of undid me. And just to say I'm like, because I also always had like a crush on Letterman. Like I wanted to be Letterman. I wanted to be with Letterman. And I'm like, I wonder if I'd worked there, if I would have been the one.
But the reality is, the one he cheated on with.
The wife. Maybe I could have ended up being the wife.
How many Letterman? I know a lot of Letterman writers. I don't know
Delete that. Delete that.
No one I knew who wrote for Letterman was happy there. They were all miserable.
Yes, they were all miserable. And you do find that out, I will say, along the way about a lot of shows that we love.
That's right. Yeah.
Where you're like, oh, everyone is like on the brink of truly losing their minds working there.
Which brings to next question.
Okay. Oh, no.
You don't always get what you want. You talked about getting your writing job at SNL.
Yes.
And you said it was not necessarily the dream job you thought it might be.
Correct.
What was it? It's not a good fit for a lot of writers.
Yeah, it was not a good fit for me. Go on. I'm sorry, I didn't let you finish
No,
your
not
question.
at all. Go ahead.
No, you finish the one.
Which I think is a good lesson because just because you get sometimes you end up doing things you never dreamed about doing, and sometimes the dream jobs you get are not a good fit.
Yeah.
But you talked about this on a Moth sketch where you almost overwrote, and until you learn to relax and find your own writing voice, it was very uncomfortable to work there.
Yeah, it was extremely, extremely uncomfortable for me to work there. It was just not my process. I always have to say that I feel very proud that I worked there. It was my absolute childhood dream, even more than working for and marrying David Letterman. I really wanted to write at SNL and marry nobody there, and got the job. And I had a little inkling already because I knew other people who'd sort of like flamed out a bit there. I didn't like. It's a very sort of survivor-based system. I learned a lot about like how I didn't want to work. It's incredible, the people who thrive there and how they make it work. And I just wasn't one of those people. But I realized I like a more collaborative process. I like sort of working at a table together to like figure out what we're all gonna do. Let people come in with like their half-baked idea that then we can all bake together. Like that's just my way of doing it. But obviously, SNL is a machine that works incredibly well, and the people who thrive there are incredible. And I had to sort of stop blaming myself at some point and be like, well, that's just not the machine I work well in.
But you did get something on the air, right? You got a few pieces on the air.
Mainly got one piece on the air.
You said you came to the conclusion that you had to make peace with bombing, and that you had to stop writing from a place of fear, and you had to be brave.
Yeah.
So what does that mean exactly, brave?
Great question. Brave in the context of like writing?
Yeah.
Well, I really do think, so many things. Part of what I will say that I loved about stand-up and the journey through that is that the lessons that you learn are really lessons for life, and they can be extrapolated to all areas of living. And learning, I would say, like learning to bomb in whatever you're doing, to fail and not be destroyed by it, and to kind of laugh it off and keep going. I mean, that took years to learn. Like someone who's like really good at bombing to me is as funny as the funniest person, because like, and I think I just saw like Will Ferrell and somebody else talking about a sketch where they were just bombing so hard and just committed to bombing insanely hard during the sketch, and that's funny.
Right.
I think I was trying so hard to figure out how to make it work there at SNL, and how do I do this, and it was I was like really crushed, depressed, spiritually dying, I think I wouldn't have learned as much if I hadn't gone through that experience. Not that I hadn't bombed or been bad at jobs before, because I certainly was, but that's a pretty big situation that felt like, oh, this really stinks.
Did you take what you learned? When I interviewed Bob Odenkirk, he said he took what he learned at SNL and everything he disliked about it, he then changed when he ran this writing room for Mr. Show.
Great show.
Great show. So did you take what you learned and try to do something different with Inside Amy Schumer and other shows you've worked on?
Yeah, absolutely. I pretty much did the opposite of everything. Again, not judging how it works there, because it works incredibly well for the people that it works for. But yeah, with Inside Amy Schumer, it was the first time I was in charge of a show, along with Dan Powell and Amy herself, and I would just be like, everybody come in and like just talk about like one thing that you think is kind of funny, and bring in a few of those, and we'll just like figure it out together, and like that was so fun, and that would like, we'd find the thing that was the thing, and then it made us laugh, and we'd keep going with it, and I've taken that process, probably, I don't know, maybe Bob Odenkirk similarly. It's just like just wanted a more open, collaborative space. I like that.
Well, aren't ideas, isn't comedy better for that? That it's open and it's collaborative and you're not throwing out ideas willy-nilly, never to be seen again?
It's really subjective. Again, SNL, it's cordoned off. People are writing in little pairs. It's not, you ultimately table things together and punch things up together, but people are like podding and doing stuff, and that's how that show works. And I still love it. I love the, like, we don't know where we're gonna get feeling of, like, I'm terrible at coming up with like a great sketch idea, but I'm really good at coming up with like a quarter of one. And then I think I'm also really good at hiring people that I think are funnier than me, who will make me look better. That's
Right.
that's the great joy.
But that's the thing you can't do when you write a book. It's all on you.
This is why I drank so much when I was writing my book.
So,
Why would you say that?
I'm so sorry.
It's okay. Yeah. Well, you got a great editor, though. You have I did love an editor. I love
But
an
the
editor.
joy of working collaboratively is something that I miss writing. When I grew up watching shows, it was all about hearing about Letterman, about The Simpsons, about Conan O'Brien, and the magic of working together. When you're in a room writing alone, it can, especially for 2 years, it can be very lonely.
It can be very, very lonely for sure. It's really hard, but it does feel like that moment when, like, as you know, a cardboard box comes
That's
one day.
right. Something tangible you can hold.
And you can hold it. And I can say that about more than any other thing I've worked on. Like, I hold my book, and I feel incredibly fucking proud of my book. But, like, the little unbox moment,
It's the
which the
best.
kids love to put on Instagram now. I was like, I don't know how to hold my phone and open a box. But yeah, you're like, it fucking exists.
Okay, so for anyone out there who wants to get into comedy, I was here, I went to Tulane. How does one go? What would you recommend they do, and what would you recommend they not do to get into a career of comedy?
Well, again, you sound like you really have specific ideas about what not to do. It's so hard because I think I think it's easier now than it was when I'm 49. And expected like a standing ovation. I don't know what I paused for, but like nothing. I'm turning 50 soon, but you just got to go out and make stuff now. It's so like
do it. Just make it.
Just do it and write it and have a Substack or put things on TikTok, or like I think about Rob Delaney, who I love so much. He had like a funny picture of himself wearing a green thong and was tweeting funny stuff like that. There's so many ways, and just don't be discouraged, and just do it and connect with people.
Jessi Klein, I could choose anyone I wanted to bring down. I chose Jessi. Her work has meant a lot to me over the years. She's also one of the nicest people. She's going to be signing her books over in the tent. Thank you so much for coming, Jessi Klein.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you for coming.
Thanks so much, Mike. That was so fun.